The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle. Part 4. The first chapter. Shellfish languages again. Miranda, the purple bird of paradise, had prophesied rightly when she had foretold a good spell of weather. For 3 weeks the good ship Curlew plowed her way through smiling seas before a steady powerful wind. I suppose most real sailors would have found this part of the voyage dull. But not I. As we got further south and further west, the face of the sea seemed different every day. And all the little things of a voyage which an old hand would have hardly bothered to notice were matters of great interest for my eager eyes. We did not pass many ships. When we did see one, the doctor would get out his telescope and we would all take a look at it. Sometimes he would signal to it, asking for news, by hauling up little colored flags upon the mast, and the ship would signal back to us in the same way. The meaning of all the signals was printed in a book which the doctor kept in the cabin. He told me it was the language of the sea and that all ships could understand it, whether they be English, Dutch, or French. Our greatest happening during those first weeks was passing an iceberg. When the sun shone on it, it burst into 100 colors, sparkling like a jeweled palace in a fairy story. Through the telescope we saw a mother polar bear with a cub sitting on it, watching us. The doctor recognized her as one of the bears who had spoken to him when he was discovering the North Pole. So he sailed the ship up close and offered to take her and her baby onto the Curlew if she wished it. But she only shook her head, thanking him. She said it would be far too hot for the cub on the deck of our ship, with no ice to keep his feet cool. It had been indeed a very hot day, but the nearness of that great mountain of ice made us all turn up our coat collars and shiver with the cold. During those quiet peaceful days I improved my reading and writing a great deal with the doctor's help. I got on so well that he let me keep the ship's log. This is a big book kept on every ship, a kind of diary, in which the number of miles run, the direction of your course, and everything else that happens is written down. The doctor too, in what spare time he had, was nearly always writing in his notebooks. I used to peep into these sometimes, now that I could read, but I found it hard work to make out the doctor's handwriting. Many of these notebooks seemed to be about sea things. There were 6 thick ones filled full with notes and sketches of different seaweeds, and there were others on sea birds, others on sea worms, others on seashells. They were all some day to be rewritten, printed and bound like regular books. One afternoon we saw, floating around us, great quantities of stuff that looked like dead grass. The doctor told me this was gulfweed. A little further on it became so thick that it covered all the water as far as the eye could reach. It made the Curlew look as though she were moving across a meadow instead of sailing the Atlantic. Crawling about upon this weed, many crabs were to be seen. And the sight of them reminded the doctor of his dream of learning the language of the shellfish. He fished several of these crabs up with a net and put them in his listening tank to see if he could understand them. Among the crabs he also caught a strange-looking, chubby, little fish which he told me was called a silver fidget. After he had listened to the crabs for a while with no success, he put the fidget into the tank and began to listen to that. I had to leave him at this moment to go and attend to some duties on the deck. But presently I heard him below shouting for me to come down again. "Stubbins," he cried as soon as he saw me, "a most extraordinary thing, quite unbelievable. I am not sure whether I'm dreaming. Can't believe my own senses." Why, doctor," I said, "what is it, what's the matter?" "The fidget," he whispered, pointing with a trembling finger to the listening tank in which the little round fish was still swimming quietly. "He talks English. And he whistles tunes, English tunes." "Talks English?" I cried. "Whistles, why, it's impossible." "It's a fact," said the doctor, white in the face with excitement. "It's only a few words, scattered, with no particular sense to them, all mixed up with his own language which I can't make out yet. But they're English words, unless there's something very wrong with my hearing, and the tune he whistles, it's as plain as anything, always the same tune. Now you listen and tell me what you make of it. Tell me everything you hear. Don't miss a word." I went to the glass tank upon the table while the doctor grabbed a notebook and a pencil. Undoing my collar, I stood upon the empty packing case he had been using for a stand and put my right ear down under the water. For some moments I detected nothing at all except, with my dry ear, the heavy breathing of the doctor as he waited, all stiff and anxious, for me to say something. At last, from within the water, sounding like a child singing miles and miles away, I heard an unbelievably thin, small voice. "Ah," I said. "What is it?" asked the doctor in a hoarse, trembly whisper. "What does he say?" "I can't quite make it out," I said. "It's mostly in some strange fish language. Oh, but wait a minute, yes, now I get it, no smoking. My, here's a queer one. Popcorn and picture postcards here. This way out. Don't spit, what funny things to say, doctor, oh, but wait, now he's whistling the tune." "What tune is it?" gasped the doctor. "John Peel." "Aha," cried the doctor, "that's what I made it out to be." And he wrote furiously in his notebook. I went on listening. "This is most extraordinary," the doctor kept muttering to himself as his pencil went wiggling over the page. "Most extraordinary but frightfully thrilling. I wonder where he hears some more," I cried, "some more English. The big tank needs cleaning. That's all. Now he's talking fish talk again. The big tank," the doctor murmured, frowning in a puzzled kind of way. "I wonder where on earth he learned." Then he bounded up out of his chair. "I have it," he yelled, "this fish has escaped from an aquarium. Why, of course. Look at the kind of things he has learned. Picture postcards, they always sell them in aquariums. Don't spit, no smoking, this way out, the things the attendants say. And then, my, here's a queer one. That's the kind of thing that people exclaim when they look into the tanks. It all fits. There's no doubt about it, Stubbins, we have here a fish who has escaped from captivity. And it's quite possible, not certain, by any means, but quite possible that I may now, through him, be able to establish communication with the shellfish. This is a great piece of luck." The second chapter. The Fidget's Story. Well, now that he was started once more upon his old hobby of the shellfish languages, there was no stopping the doctor. He worked right through the night. A little after midnight I fell asleep in a chair. About 2 in the morning Bumpo fell asleep at the wheel, and for 5 hours the Curlew was allowed to drift where she liked. But still John Dolittle worked on, trying his hardest to understand the Fidget's language, struggling to make the Fidget understand him. When I woke up it was broad daylight again. The doctor was still standing at the listening tank, looking as tired as an owl and dreadfully wet. But on his face there was a proud and happy smile. "Stubbins," he said as soon as he saw me stir, "I've done it. I've got the key to the Fidget's language. It's a frightfully difficult language, quite different from anything I ever heard. The only thing it reminds me of slightly is ancient Hebrew. It isn't shellfish, but it's a big step towards it. Now, the next thing, I want you to take a pencil and a fresh notebook and write down everything I say. The Fidget has promised to tell me the story of his life. I will translate it into English and you put it down in the book. Are you ready?" Once more the doctor lowered his ear beneath the level of the water, and as he began to speak, I started to write. And this is the story that the Fidget told us. 13 months in an aquarium. I was born in the Pacific Ocean, close to the coast of Chile. I was one of a family of 2,510. Soon after our mother and father left us, we youngsters got scattered. The family was broken up by a herd of whales who chased us. I and my sister, Klippa, she was my favorite sister, had a very narrow escape for our lives. As a rule, whales are not very hard to get away from if you are good at dodging, if you've only got a quick swerve. But this one that came after Klippa and myself was a very mean whale. Every time he lost us under a stone or something he'd come back and hunt till he rooted us out into the open again. I never saw such a nasty, persevering brute. Well, we shook him at last, though not before he had worried us for hundreds of miles northward, up the west coast of South America. But luck was against us that day. While we were resting and trying to get our breath, another family of fidgets came rushing by, shouting, "Come on! Swim for your lives! The dogfish are coming!" Now dogfish are particularly fond of fidgets. We are, you might say, their favorite food, and for that reason we always keep away from deep, muddy waters. What's more, dogfish are not easy to escape from, they are terribly fast and clever hunters. So up we had to jump and on again. After we had gone a few more 100 miles, we looked back and saw that the dogfish were gaining on us. So we turned into a harbor. It happened to be one on the west coast of the United States. Here we guessed, and hoped, the dogfish would not be likely to follow us. As it happened, they didn't even see us turn in, but dashed on northward, and we never saw them again. I hope they froze to death in the Arctic seas. But, as I said, luck was against us that day. While I and my sister were cruising gently round the ships anchored in the harbor looking for orange peels, a great delicacy with us, swoop, bang, dash, we were caught in a net. We struggled for all we were worth, but it was no use. The net was small meshed and strongly made. Kicking and flipping, we were hauled up the side of the ship and dumped down on the deck, high and dry in a blazing noonday sun. Here a couple of old men in whiskers and spectacles leaned over us, making strange sounds. Some codling had got caught in the net the same time as we were. These the old men threw back into the sea, but us they seemed to think very precious. They put us carefully into a large jar, and after they had taken us on shore they went to a big house and changed us from the jar into glass boxes full of water. This house was on the edge of the harbor, and a small stream of sea water was made to flow through the glass tank so we could breathe properly. Of course we had never lived inside glass walls before, and at first we kept on trying to swim through them and got our noses awfully sore bumping the glass at full speed. Then followed weeks and weeks of weary idleness. They treated us well, so far as they knew how. The old fellows in spectacles came and looked at us proudly twice a day and saw that we had the proper food to eat, the right amount of light, and that the water was not too hot or too cold. But oh, the dullness of that life! It seemed we were a kind of a show. At a certain hour every morning the big doors of the house were thrown open, and everybody in the city who had nothing special to do came in and looked at us. There were other tanks filled with different kinds of fishes all round the walls of the big room. And the crowds would go from tank to tank, looking in at us through the glass with their mouths open, like half-wit flounders. We got so sick of it that we used to open our mouths back at them, and this they seemed to think highly comical. One day my sister said to me, "Think you, brother, that these strange creatures who have captured us can talk?" "Surely," said I, "have you not noticed that some talk with the lips only, some with the whole face, and yet others discourse with the hands? When they come quite close to the glass you can hear them. Listen." At that moment a female, larger than the rest, pressed her nose up against the glass, pointed at me and said to her young behind her, "Oh, look, here's a queer one." And then we noticed that they nearly always said this when they looked in. And for a long time we thought that such was the whole extent of the language, this being a people of but few ideas. To help pass away the weary hours we learned it by heart, "Oh, look, here's a queer one." But we never got to know what it meant. Other phrases, however, we did get the meaning of, and we even learned to read a little in man talk. Many big signs there were, set up upon the walls, and when we saw that the keepers stopped the people from spitting and smoking, pointed to these signs angrily and read them out loud, we knew then that these writings signified, "No smoking and don't spit." Then in the evenings, after the crowd had gone, the same aged male with one leg of wood, swept up the peanut shells with a broom every night. And while he was so doing he always whistled the same tune to himself. This melody we rather liked, and we learned that too by heart, thinking it was part of the language. Thus a whole year went by in this dismal place. Some days new fishes were brought into the other tanks, and other days old fishes were taken out. At first we had hoped we would only be kept here for a while, and that after we had been looked at sufficiently we would be returned to freedom and the sea. But as month after month went by, and we were left undisturbed, our hearts grew heavy within our prison walls of glass and we spoke to one another less and less. One day, when the crowd was thickest in the big room, a woman with a red face fainted from the heat. I watched through the glass and saw that the rest of the people got highly excited, though to me it did not seem to be a matter of very great importance. They threw cold water on her and carried her out into the open air. This made me think mightily, and presently a great idea burst upon me. "Sister," I said, turning to poor Klippa, who was sulking at the bottom of our prison trying to hide behind a stone from the stupid gaze of the children who thronged about our tank, "supposing that we pretended we were sick, do you think they would take us also from this stuffy house?" "Brother," said she wearily, "that they might do. But most likely they would throw us on a rubbish heap, where we would die in the hot sun." "But," said I, "why should they go abroad to seek a rubbish heap, when the harbor is so close? While we were being brought here I saw men throwing their rubbish into the water. If they would only throw us also there, we could quickly reach the sea." "The sea," murmured poor Klippa with a faraway look in her eyes. She had fine eyes, had my sister, Klippa. How like a dream it sounds, the sea. "Oh brother, will we ever swim in it again, think you? Every night as I lie awake on the floor of this evil-smelling dungeon I hear its hearty voice ringing in my ears. How I have longed for it! Just to feel it once again, the nice, big, wholesome homeliness of it all. To jump, just to jump from the crest of an Atlantic wave, laughing in the trade wind's spindrift, down into the blue-green swirling trough. To chase the shrimps on a summer evening, when the sky is red and the lights all pink within the foam. To lie on the top, in the doldrum's noonday calm, and warm your tummy in the tropic sun. To wander hand in hand once more through the giant seaweed forests of the Indian Ocean, seeking the delicious eggs of the pop-pop. To play hide and seek among the castles of the coral towns with their pearl and jasper windows spangling the floor of the Spanish Main. To picnic in the anemone meadows, dim blue and lilac gray, that lie in the lowlands beyond the South Sea Garden. To throw somersaults on the springy sponge beds of the Mexican Gulf. To poke about among the dead ships and see what wonders and adventures lie inside, and then, on winter nights when the northeaster whips the water into froth, to swoop down and down to get away from the cold, down to where the water's warm and dark, down and still down, till we spy the twinkle of the fire eels far below where our friends and cousins sit chatting round the council grotto, chatting, brother, over the news and gossip of the sea. Oh, and then she broke down completely, sniffling. "Stop it," I said. "You make me homesick. Look here, let's pretend we're sick, or better still, let's pretend we're dead, and see what happens. If they throw us on a rubbish heap and we fry in the sun, we'll not be much worse off than we are here in this smelly prison. What do you say? Will you risk it?" "I will," she said, and gladly. So next morning 2 fidgets were found by the keeper floating on the top of the water in their tank, stiff and dead. We gave a mighty good imitation of dead fish, although I say it myself. The keeper ran and got the old gentleman with spectacles and whiskers. They threw up their hands in horror when they saw us. Lifting us carefully out of the water, they laid us on wet cloths. That was the hardest part of all. If you're a fish and get taken out of the water, you have to keep opening and shutting your mouth to breathe at all, and even that you can't keep up for long. And all this time we had to stay stiff as sticks and breathe silently through half-closed lips. Well, the old fellows poked us and felt us and pinched us till I thought they'd never be done. Then, when their backs were turned a moment, a wretched cat got up on the table and nearly ate us. Luckily the old men turned round in time and shooed her away. You may be sure though that we took a couple of good gulps of air while they weren't looking, and that was the only thing that saved us from choking. I wanted to whisper to Klippa to be brave and stick it out. But I couldn't even do that, because, as you know, most kinds of fish talk cannot be heard, not even a shout, unless you're underwater. Then, just as we were about to give it up and let on that we were alive, one of the old men shook his head sadly, lifted us up and carried us out of the building. Now for it? I thought to myself. We'll soon know our fate, liberty or the garbage can. Outside, to our unspeakable horror, he made straight for a large ash barrel which stood against the wall on the other side of a yard. Most happily for us, however, while he was crossing this yard, a very dirty man with a wagon and horses drove up and took the ash barrel away. I suppose it was his property. Then the old man looked around for some other place to throw us. He seemed about to cast us upon the ground. But he evidently thought that this would make the yard untidy, and he desisted. The suspense was terrible. He moved outside the yard gate, and my heart sank once more as I saw that he now intended to throw us in the gutter of the roadway. But, fortune was indeed with us that day. A large man in blue clothes and silver buttons stopped him in the nick of time. Evidently, from the way the large man lectured and waved a short thick stick, it was against the rules of the town to throw dead fish in the streets. At last, to our unutterable joy, the old man turned and moved off with us towards the harbor. He walked so slowly, muttering to himself all the way and watching the man in blue out of the corner of his eye, that I wanted to bite his finger to make him hurry up. Both Klippa and I were actually at our last gasp. Finally he reached the sea wall, and giving us one last sad look, he dropped us into the waters of the harbor. Never had we realized anything like the thrill of that moment, as we felt the salt wetness close over our heads. With one flick of our tails we came to life again. The old man was so surprised that he fell right into the water, almost on top of us. From this he was rescued by a sailor with a boat hook, and the last we saw of him, the man in blue was dragging him away by the coat collar, lecturing him again. Apparently it was also against the rules of the town to throw dead fish into the harbor. But what time or thought had we for his troubles? We were free. In lightning leaps, in curving spurts, in crazy zigzags, whooping, shrieking with delight, we sped for home and the open sea. That is all of my story, and I will now, as I promised last night, try to answer any questions you may ask about the sea, on condition that I am set at liberty as soon as you have done. The Doctor: is there any part of the sea deeper than that known as the Nero Deep? I mean the one near the island of Guam. The Fidget: why, certainly. There's one much deeper than that near the mouth of the Amazon River. But it's small and hard to find. We call it the Deep Hole. And there's another in the Antarctic Sea. The Doctor: can you talk any shellfish language yourself? The Fidget: no, not a word. We regular fishes don't have anything to do with the shellfish. We consider them a low class. The Doctor: but when you're near them, can you hear the sound they make talking? I mean without necessarily understanding what they say. The Fidget: only with the very largest ones. Shellfish have such weak small voices it is almost impossible for any but their own kind to hear them. But with the bigger ones it is different. They make a sad, booming noise, rather like an iron pipe being knocked with a stone, only not nearly so loud, of course. The Doctor: I am most anxious to get down to the bottom of the sea to study many things. But we land animals, as you no doubt know, are unable to breathe underwater. Have you any ideas that might help me? The Fidget: I think that for both your difficulties the best thing for you to do would be to try and get hold of the great glass sea snail. The Doctor: who, or what, is the great glass sea snail? The Fidget: he is an enormous saltwater snail, one of the winkle family, but as large as a big house. He talks quite loudly when he speaks, but this is not often. He can go to any part of the ocean, at all depths, because he doesn't have to be afraid of any creature in the sea. His shell is made of transparent mother-o'-pearl so that you can see through it, but it's thick and strong. When he is out of his shell and he carries it empty on his back, there is room in it for a wagon and a pair of horses. He has been seen carrying his food in it when traveling. The Doctor: I feel that that is just the creature I have been looking for. He could take me and my assistant inside his shell and we could explore the deepest depths in safety. Do you think you could get him for me? The fidget, alas. No. I would willingly if I could, but he is hardly ever seen by ordinary fish. He lives at the bottom of the deep hole, and seldom comes out and into the deep hole, the lower waters of which are muddy, fishes such as we are afraid to go. The doctor, dear me. That's a terrible disappointment. Are there many of this kind of snail in the sea? The fidget, oh no. He is the only one in existence, since his second wife died long, long ago. He is the last of the giant shellfish. He belongs to past ages when the whales were land animals and all that. They say he is over 70,000 years old. The doctor, good gracious, what wonderful things he could tell me. I do wish I could meet him. The fidget, were there any more questions you wished to ask me? This water in your tank is getting quite warm and sickly. I'd like to be put back into the sea as soon as you can spare me. The doctor, just one more thing, when Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, he threw overboard 2 copies of his diary sealed up in barrels. One of them was never found. It must have sunk. I would like to get it for my library. Do you happen to know where it is? The fidget, yes, I do. That too is in the deep hole. When the barrel sank, the currents drifted it northwards down what we call the Orinoco slope, till it finally disappeared into the deep hole. If it was any other part of the sea I'd try and get it for you, but not there. The doctor, well, that is all, I think. I hate to put you back into the sea, because I know that as soon as I do, I'll think of 100 other questions I wanted to ask you. But I must keep my promise. Would you care for anything before you go? It seems a cold day, some cracker crumbs or something. The fidget, no, I won't stop. All I want just at present is fresh sea water. The doctor, I cannot thank you enough for all the information you have given me. You have been very helpful and patient. The fidget, pray do not mention it. It has been a real pleasure to be of assistance to the great John Dolittle. You are, as of course you know, already quite famous among the better class of fishes. Goodbye, and good luck to you, to your ship and to all your plans. The doctor carried the listening tank to a porthole, opened it and emptied the tank into the sea. Goodbye, he murmured as a faint splash reached us from without. I dropped my pencil on the table and leaned back with a sigh. My fingers were so stiff with writer's cramp that I felt as though I should never be able to open my hand again. But I, at least, had had a night's sleep. As for the poor doctor, he was so weary that he had hardly put the tank back upon the table and dropped into a chair, when his eyes closed and he began to snore. In the passage outside, Polynesia scratched angrily at the door. I rose and let her in. A nice state of affairs, she stormed. What sort of a ship is this? There's that colored man upstairs asleep under the wheel, the doctor asleep down here, and you making pothooks in a copybook with a pencil. Expect the ship to steer herself to Brazil? We're just drifting around the sea like an empty bottle and a week behind time as it is. What's happened to you all? She was so angry that her voice rose to a scream. But it would have taken more than that to wake the doctor. I put the notebook carefully in a drawer and went on deck to take the wheel. The 3rd chapter. Bad weather. As soon as I had the Curlew swung round upon her course again, I noticed something peculiar. We were not going as fast as we had been. Our favorable wind had almost entirely disappeared. This, at first, we did not worry about, thinking that at any moment it might spring up again. But the whole day went by, then 2 days, then a week 10 days, and the wind grew no stronger. The Curlew just dawdled along at the speed of a toddling babe. I now saw that the doctor was becoming uneasy. He kept getting out his sextant, an instrument which tells you what part of the ocean you are in, and making calculations. He was forever looking at his maps and measuring distances on them. The far edge of the sea, all around us, he examined with his telescope 100 times a day. "But doctor," I said when I found him one afternoon mumbling to himself about the misty appearance of the sky, "it wouldn't matter so much, would it, if we did take a little longer over the trip? We've got plenty to eat on board now, and the purple bird of paradise will know that we have been delayed by something that we couldn't help." "Yes, I suppose so," he said thoughtfully. "But I hate to keep her waiting. At this season of the year she generally goes to the Peruvian mountains for her health. And besides, the good weather she prophesied is likely to end any day now and delay us still further. If we could only keep moving at even a fair speed, I wouldn't mind. It's this hanging around, almost dead still, that gets me restless. Ah, here comes a wind, not very strong, but maybe it'll grow." A gentle breeze from the northeast came singing through the ropes, and we smiled up hopefully at the Curlew's leaning masts. "We've only got another 150 miles to make, to sight the coast of Brazil," said the doctor. "If that wind would just stay with us, steady, for a full day, we'd see land." But suddenly the wind changed, swung to the east, then back to the northeast, then to the north. It came in fitful gusts, as though it hadn't made up its mind which way to blow, and I was kept busy at the wheel, swinging the Curlew this way and that to keep the right side of it. Presently we heard Polynesia, who was in the rigging keeping a lookout for land or passing ships, screech down to us, "Bad weather coming. That jumpy wind is an ugly sign. And look, dash over there in the east, see that black line, low down? If that isn't a storm, I'm a landlubber. The gales round here are fierce, when they do blow tear your canvas out like paper. You take the wheel, doctor, it'll need a strong arm if it's a real storm. I'll go wake Bumpo and Chi-Chi. This looks bad to me. We'd best get all the sail down right away, till we see how strong she's going to blow." Indeed, the whole sky was now beginning to take on a very threatening look. The black line to the eastward grew blacker as it came nearer and nearer. A low, rumbly, whispering noise went moaning over the sea. The water, which had been so blue and smiling, turned to a ruffled, ugly gray. And across the darkening sky, shreds of cloud swept like tattered witches flying from the storm. I must confess I was frightened. You see, I had only so far seen the sea in friendly moods, sometimes quiet and lazy, sometimes laughing, venturesome and reckless, sometimes brooding and poetic, when moonbeams turned her ripples into silver threads and dreaming snowy night clouds piled up fairy castles in the sky. But as yet I had not known, or even guessed at, the terrible strength of the sea's wild anger. When that storm finally struck us, we leaned right over flatly on our side, as though some invisible giant had slapped the poor Curlew on the cheek. After that, things happened so thick and so fast that what with the wind that stopped your breath, the driving, blinding water, the deafening noise and the rest, I haven't a very clear idea of how our shipwreck came about. I remember seeing the sails, which we were now trying to roll up upon the deck, torn out of our hands by the wind and go overboard like a penny balloon, very nearly carrying Chi-Chi with them. And I have a dim recollection of Polynesia screeching somewhere for one of us to go downstairs and close the portholes. In spite of our masts being bare of sail, we were now scudding along to the southward at a great pace. But every once in a while huge grey-black waves would arise from under the ship's side like nightmare monsters, swell and climb, then crash down upon us, pressing us into the sea, and the poor Curlew would come to a standstill, half under water, like a gasping, drowning pig. While I was clambering along towards the wheel to see the doctor, clinging like a leech with hands and legs to the rails lest I be blown overboard, one of these tremendous seas tore loose my hold, filled my throat with water and swept me like a cork the full length of the deck. My head struck a door with an awful bang. And then I fainted. The fourth chapter. Wrecked. When I awoke I was very hazy in my head. The sky was blue and the sea was calm. At first I thought that I must have fallen asleep in the sun on the deck of the Curlew. And thinking that I would be late for my turn at the wheel, I tried to rise to my feet. I found I couldn't, my arms were tied to something behind me with a piece of rope. By twisting my neck around I found this to be a mast, broken off short. Then I realized that I wasn't sitting on a ship at all, I was only sitting on a piece of one. I began to feel uncomfortably scared. Screwing up my eyes, I searched the rim of the sea north, east, south, and west. No land, no ships, nothing was in sight. I was alone in the ocean. At last, little by little, my bruised head began to remember what had happened. First, the coming of the storm, the sails going overboard, then the big wave which had banged me against the door. But what had become of the doctor and the others? What day was this, tomorrow or the day after, and why was I sitting on only part of a ship? Working my hand into my pocket, I found my penknife and cut the rope that tied me. This reminded me of a shipwreck story which Joe had once told me, of a captain who had tied his son to a mast in order that he shouldn't be washed overboard by the gale. So of course it must have been the doctor who had done the same to me. But where was he? The awful thought came to me that the doctor and the rest of them must be drowned, since there was no other wreckage to be seen upon the waters. I got to my feet and stared around the sea again, nothing but water and sky. Presently a long way off I saw the small dark shape of a bird skimming low down over the swell. When it came quite close I saw it was a stormy petrel. I tried to talk to it, to see if it could give me news. But unluckily I hadn't learned much seabird language and I couldn't even attract its attention, much less make it understand what I wanted. Twice it circled round my raft, lazily, with hardly a flip of the wing. And I could not help wondering, in spite of the distress I was in, where it had spent last night, how it, or any other living thing, had weathered such a smashing storm. It made me realize the great big difference between different creatures, and that size and strength are not everything. To this petrel, a frail little thing of feathers, much smaller and weaker than I, the sea could do anything she liked, it seemed, and his only answer was a lazy, saucy flip of the wing. He was the one who should be called the able seaman. For, come raging gale, come sunlit calm, this wilderness of water was his home. After swooping over the sea around me, just looking for food, I supposed, he went off in the direction from which he had come. And I was alone once more. I found I was somewhat hungry and a little thirsty too. I began to think all sorts of miserable thoughts, the way one does when he is lonesome and has missed breakfast. What was going to become of me now, if the doctor and the rest were drowned? I would starve to death or die of thirst. Then the sun went behind some clouds and I felt cold. How many hundreds or thousands of miles was I from any land? What if another storm should come and smash up even this poor raft on which I stood? I went on like this for a while, growing gloomier and gloomier, when suddenly I thought of Polynesia. "You're always safe with the doctor," she had said. "He gets there. Remember that." I'm sure I wouldn't have minded so much if he had been here with me. It was this being all alone that made me want to weep. And yet the petrel was alone. What a baby I was, I told myself, to be scared to the verge of tears just by loneliness. I was quite safe where I was for the present anyhow. John Dolittle wouldn't get scared by a little thing like this. He only got excited when he made a discovery, found a new bug or something. And if what Polynesia had said was true, he couldn't be drowned and things would come out all right in the end somehow. I threw out my chest, buttoned up my collar and began walking up and down the short raft to keep warm. I would be like John Dolittle. I wouldn't cry and I wouldn't get excited. How long I paced back and forth I don't know. But it was a long time, for I had nothing else to do. At last I got tired and lay down to rest. And in spite of all my troubles, I soon fell fast asleep. This time when I woke up, stars were staring down at me out of a cloudless sky. The sea was still calm, and my strange craft was rocking gently under me on an easy swell. All my fine courage left me as I gazed up into the big silent night and felt the pains of hunger and thirst set to work in my stomach harder than ever. "Are you awake?" said a high silvery voice at my elbow. I sprang up as though someone had stuck a pin in me. And there, perched at the very end of my raft, her beautiful golden tail glowing dimly in the starlight, sat Miranda, the purple bird of paradise. Never have I been so glad to see anyone in my life. I almost fell into the water as I leapt to hug her. I didn't want to wake you, said she. I guessed you must be tired after all you've been through. Don't squash the life out of me, boy, I'm not a stuffed duck, you know. Oh, Miranda, you dear old thing, said I, I'm so glad to see you. Tell me, where is the doctor? Is he alive? Of course he's alive, and it's my firm belief he always will be. He's over there, about 40 miles to the westward. What's he doing there? He's sitting on the other half of the curlew shaving himself, or he was, when I left him. Well, thank heaven he's alive, said I. And Bumpo and the animals, are they all right? Yes, they're with him. Your ship broke in half in the storm. The doctor had tied you down when he found you stunned. And the part you were on got separated and floated away. Golly, it was a storm. One has to be a gull or an albatross to stand that sort of weather. I had been watching for the doctor for 3 weeks, from a cliff top, but last night I had to take refuge in a cave to keep my tail feathers from blowing out. As soon as I found the doctor, he sent me off with some porpoises to look for you. A stormy petrel volunteered to help us in our search. There had been quite a gathering of seabirds waiting to greet the doctor, but the rough weather sort of broke up the arrangements that had been made to welcome him properly. It was the petrel that first gave us the tip where you were. Well, but how can I get to the doctor, Miranda, I haven't any oars. Get to him, why, you're going to him now. Look behind you. I turned around. The moon was just rising on the sea's edge. And I now saw that my raft was moving through the water, but so gently that I had not noticed it before. What's moving us? I asked. The porpoises, said Miranda. I went to the back of the raft and looked down into the water. And just below the surface I could see the dim forms of 4 big porpoises, their sleek skins glinting in the moonlight, pushing at the raft with their noses. They're old friends of the doctor's, said Miranda. They'd do anything for John Dolittle. We should see his party soon now. We're pretty near the place I left them. Yes, there they are. See that dark shape? No, more to the right of where you're looking. Can't you make out the figure of the black man standing against the sky? Now Chi spies us, he's waving. Don't you see them? I didn't, for my eyes were not as sharp as Miranda's. But presently from somewhere in the murky dusk I heard Bumpo singing his African comic songs with the full force of his enormous voice. And in a little, by peering and peering in the direction of the sound, I at last made out a dim mass of tattered, splintered wreckage, all that remained of the poor curlew floating low down upon the water. A hello came through the night. And I answered it. We kept it up, calling to one another back and forth across the calm night sea. And a few minutes later the two halves of our brave little ruined ship bumped gently together again. Now that I was nearer and the moon was higher I could see more plainly. Their half of the ship was much bigger than mine. It lay partly upon its side, and most of them were perched upon the top munching ship's biscuit. But close down to the edge of the water, using the sea's calm surface for a mirror and a piece of broken bottle for a razor, John Dolittle was shaving his face by the light of the moon. The 5th chapter. Land. They all gave me a great greeting as I clambered off my half of the ship onto theirs. Bumpo brought me a wonderful drink of fresh water which he drew from a barrel, and Chi and Polynesia stood around me feeding me ship's biscuit. But it was the sight of the doctor's smiling face, just knowing that I was with him once again, that cheered me more than anything else. As I watched him carefully wipe his glass razor and put it away for future use, I could not help comparing him in my mind with the stormy petrel. Indeed, the vast strange knowledge which he had gained from his speech and friendship with animals had brought him the power to do things which no other human being would dare to try. Like the petrel, he could apparently play with the sea in all her moods. It was no wonder that many of the ignorant savage peoples among whom he passed in his voyages made statues of him, showing him as half a fish, half a bird, and half a man. And ridiculous though it was, I could quite understand what Miranda meant when she said she firmly believed that he could never die. Just to be with him gave you a wonderful feeling of comfort and safety. Except for his appearance, his clothes were crumpled and damp and his battered high hat was stained with salt water. That storm which had so terrified me had disturbed him no more than getting stuck on the mud bank in Puddleby River. Politely thanking Miranda for getting me so quickly, he asked her if she would now go ahead of us and show us the way to Spider Monkey Island. Next, he gave orders to the porpoises to leave my old piece of the ship and push the bigger half wherever the bird of paradise should lead us. How much he had lost in the wreck besides his razor I did not know. Everything, most likely, together with all the money he had saved up to buy the ship with. And still he was smiling as though he wanted for nothing in the world. The only things he had saved, as far as I could see beyond the barrel of water and bag of biscuit, were his precious notebooks. These, I saw when he stood up, he had strapped around his waist with yards and yards of twine. He was, as old Matthew Mugg used to say, a great man. He was unbelievable. And now for 3 days we continued our journey slowly but steadily southward. The only inconvenience we suffered from was the cold. This seemed to increase as we went forward. The doctor said that the island, disturbed from its usual paths by the great gale, had evidently drifted further south than it had ever been before. On the third night poor Miranda came back to us nearly frozen. She told the doctor that in the morning we would find the island quite close to us, though we couldn't see it now as it was a misty dark night. She said that she must hurry back at once to a warmer climate, and that she would visit the doctor in Puddleby next August as usual. "Don't forget, Miranda," said John Dolittle, "if you should hear anything of what happened to Long Arrow, to get word to me." The bird of paradise assured him she would. And after the doctor had thanked her again and again for all that she had done for us, she wished us good luck and disappeared into the night. We were all awake early in the morning, long before it was light, waiting for our first glimpse of the country we had come so far to see. And as the rising sun turned the eastern sky to gray, of course it was old Polynesia who first shouted that she could see palm trees and mountain tops. With the growing light it became plain to all of us, a long island with high rocky mountains in the middle and so near to us that you could almost throw your hat upon the shore. The porpoises gave us one last push and our strange-looking craft bumped gently on a low beach. Then, thanking our lucky stars for a chance to stretch our cramped legs, we all bundled off onto the land, the first land, even though it was floating land, that we had trodden for 6 weeks. What a thrill I felt as I realized that Spider Monkey Island, the little spot in the atlas which my pencil had touched, lay at last beneath my feet. When the light increased still further we noticed that the palms and grasses of the island seemed withered and almost dead. The doctor said that it must be on account of the cold that the island was now suffering from in its new climate. These trees and grasses, he told us, were the kind that belonged to warm, tropical weather. The porpoises asked if we wanted them any further. And the doctor said that he didn't think so, not for the present nor the raft either, he added, for it was already beginning to fall to pieces and could not float much longer. As we were preparing to go inland and explore the island, we suddenly noticed a whole band of red Indians watching us with great curiosity from among the trees. The doctor went forward to talk to them. But he could not make them understand. He tried by signs to show them that he had come on a friendly visit. The Indians didn't seem to like us, however. They had bows and arrows and long hunting spears, with stone points, in their hands, and they made signs back to the doctor to tell him that if he came a step nearer they would kill us all. They evidently wanted us to leave the island at once. It was a very uncomfortable situation. At last the doctor made them understand that he only wanted to see the island all over and that then he would go away, though how he meant to do it, with no boat to sail in, was more than I could imagine. While they were talking among themselves another Indian arrived, apparently with a message that they were wanted in some other part of the island. Because presently, shaking their spears threateningly at us, they went off with the newcomer. "What discourteous pagans!" said Bumpo. Did you ever see such inhospitability, never even asked us if we'd had breakfast, the benighted bounders. Sh. They're going off to their village, said Polynesia. I'll bet there's a village on the other side of those mountains. If you take my advice, Doctor, you'll get away from this beach while their backs are turned. Let us go up into the higher land for the present, some place where they won't know where we are. They may grow friendlier when they see we mean no harm. They have honest, open faces and look like a decent crowd to me. They're just ignorant, probably never saw white folks before. So, feeling a little bit discouraged by our first reception, we moved off towards the mountains in the center of the island. The 6th chapter. The job is re. We found the woods at the feet of the hills thick and tangly and somewhat hard to get through. On Polynesia's advice, we kept away from all paths and trails, feeling it best to avoid meeting any Indians for the present. But she and Chi-Chi were good guides and splendid jungle hunters, and the two of them set to work at once looking for food for us. In a very short space of time they had found quite a number of different fruits and nuts which made excellent eating, though none of us knew the names of any of them. We discovered a nice clean stream of good water which came down from the mountains, so we were supplied with something to drink as well. We followed the stream up towards the heights. And presently we came to parts where the woods were thinner and the ground rocky and steep. Here we could get glimpses of wonderful views all over the island, with the blue sea beyond. While we were admiring one of these, the doctor suddenly said, "Sh, a job is re, don you hear it?" We listened and heard, somewhere in the air about us, an extraordinarily musical hum like a bee, but not just one note. This hum rose and fell, up and down almost like someone singing. No other insect but the jabizri beetle hums like that, said the doctor. I wonder where he is, quite near, by the sound, flying among the trees probably. Oh, if I only had my butterfly net. Why didn't I think to strap that around my waist too? Confound the storm, I may miss the chance of a lifetime now of getting the rarest beetle in the world. Oh look! There he goes. A huge beetle, easily 3 inches long I should say, suddenly flew by our noses. The doctor got frightfully excited. He took off his hat to use as a net, swooped at the beetle and caught it. He nearly fell down a precipice onto the rocks below in his wild hurry, but that didn't bother him in the least. He knelt down, chortling, upon the ground with the jabizri safe under his hat. From his pocket he brought out a glass-topped box, and into this he very skillfully made the beetle walk from under the rim of the hat. Then he rose up, happy as a child, to examine his new treasure through the glass lid. It certainly was a most beautiful insect. It was pale blue underneath, but its back was glossy black with huge red spots on it. There isn't an entomologist in the whole world who wouldn't give all he has to be in my shoes today, said the doctor. Hello. This jabizri's got something on his leg, doesn't he look like mud? I wonder what it is. He took the beetle carefully out of the box and held it by its back in his fingers, where it waved its 6 legs slowly in the air. We all crowded about him peering at it. Rolled around the middle section of its right foreleg was something that looked like a thin dried leaf. It was bound on very neatly with strong spider web. It was marvelous to see how John Dolittle with his fat heavy fingers undid that cobweb cord and unrolled the leaf, whole, without tearing it or hurting the precious beetle. The jabizri he put back into the box. Then he spread the leaf out flat and examined it. You can imagine our surprise when we found that the inside of the leaf was covered with signs and pictures, drawn so tiny that you almost needed a magnifying glass to tell what they were. Some of the signs we couldn't make out at all, but nearly all of the pictures were quite plain, figures of men and mountains mostly. The whole was done in a curious sort of brown ink. For several moments there was a dead silence while we all stared at the leaf, fascinated and mystified. I think this is written in blood, said the doctor at last. It turns that color when it's dry. Somebody pricked his finger to make these pictures. It's an old dodge when you're short of ink, but highly unsanitary. What an extraordinary thing to find tied to a beetle's leg. I wish I could talk beetle language, and find out where the Jabazri got it from. But what is it? I asked rows of little pictures and signs. What do you make of it, doctor? It's a letter, he said, a picture letter. All these little things put together mean a message, but why give a message to a beetle to carry and to a Jabazri, the rarest beetle in the world, what an extraordinary thing. Then he fell to muttering over the pictures. I wonder what it means, men walking up a mountain, men walking into a hole in a mountain falling down, it's a good drawing, that, men pointing to their open mouths, bars, prison bars, perhaps, men praying, men lying down, they look as though they might be sick, and last of all, just a mountain, a peculiar shaped mountain. All of a sudden the doctor looked up sharply at me, a wonderful smile of delighted understanding spreading over his face. Long arrow. He cried, don't you see, Stubbins, why, of course. Only a naturalist would think of doing a thing like this, giving his letter to a beetle, not to a common beetle, but to the rarest of all, one that other naturalists would try to catch. Well. Long arrow, a picture letter from Long Arrow. 4 pictures are the only writing that he knows. Yes, but who is the letter to? I asked. It's to me, very likely. Miranda had told him, I know, years ago, that someday I meant to come here. But if not for me, then it's for anyone who caught the beetle and read it. It's a letter to the world. Well, but what does it say? It doesn't seem to me that it's much good to you now you've got it. Yes, it is, he said, because, look, I can read it now. First picture, men walking up a mountain, that's Long Arrow and his party, men going into a hole in a mountain, they enter a cave looking for medicine plants or mosses, a mountain falling down, some hanging rocks must have slipped and trapped them, imprisoned them in the cave. And this was the only living creature that could carry a message for them to the outside world, a beetle, who could burrow his way into the open air. Of course it was only a slim chance that the beetle would be ever caught and the letter read. But it was a chance, and when men are in great danger they grab at any straw of hope. All right. Now look at the next picture, men pointing to their open mouths, they are hungry, men praying, begging anyone who finds this letter to come to their assistance, men lying down, they are sick, or starving. This letter, Stubbins, is their last cry for help. He sprang to his feet as he ended, snatched out a notebook and put the letter between the leaves. His hands were trembling with haste and agitation. Come on, he cried, up the mountain, all of you. There's not a moment to lose. Bumpo, bring the water and nuts with you. Heaven only knows how long they've been pining underground. Let's hope and pray we're not too late. But where are you going to look? I asked. Miranda said the island was 100 miles long and the mountains seemed to run all the way down the center of it. Didn't you see the last picture? He said, grabbing up his hat from the ground and cramming it on his head. It was an oddly shaped mountain, looked like a hawk's head. Well, there's where he is if he's still alive. First thing for us to do, is to get up on a high peak and look around the island for a mountain shaped like a hawk's head. Just to think of it. There's a chance of my meeting Long Arrow, the son of Golden Arrow, after all. Come on. Hurry. To delay may mean death to the greatest naturalist ever born. The 7th chapter. Hawk's Head Mountain. We all agreed afterwards that none of us had ever worked so hard in our lives before as we did that day. For my part, I know I was often on the point of dropping exhausted with fatigue, but I just kept on going like a machine, determined that, whatever happened, I would not be the first to give up. When we had scrambled to the top of a high peak, almost instantly we saw the strange mountain pictured in the letter. In shape it was the perfect image of a hawk's head, and was, as far as we could see, the second highest summit in the island. Although we were all out of breath from our climb, the doctor didn't let us rest a second as soon as he had sighted it. With one look at the sun for direction, down he dashed again, breaking through thickets, splashing over brooks, taking all the shortcuts. For a fat man, he was certainly the swiftest cross-country runner I ever saw. We floundered after him as fast as we could. When I say we, I mean Bumpo and myself, for the animals, Jip, Chi-Chi, and Polynesia, were a long way ahead, even beyond the doctor, enjoying the hunt like a paper chase. At length we arrived at the foot of the mountain we were making for, and we found its sides very steep. Said the doctor, "Now we will separate and search for caves. This spot where we now are, will be our meeting place. If anyone finds anything like a cave or a hole where the earth and rocks have fallen in, he must shout and hello to the rest of us. If we find nothing, we will all gather here in about an hour's time. Everybody understand?" Then we all went off our different ways. Each of us, you may be sure, was anxious to be the one to make a discovery. And never was a mountain searched so thoroughly. But alas! Nothing could we find that looked in the least like a fallen-in cave. There were plenty of places where rocks had tumbled down to the foot of the slopes, but none of these appeared as though caves or passages could possibly lie behind them. One by one, tired and disappointed, we straggled back to the meeting place. The doctor seemed gloomy and impatient, but by no means inclined to give up. "Jip," he said, "couldn't you smell anything like an Indian anywhere?" "No," said Jip. "I sniffed at every crack on the mountainside. But I am afraid my nose will be of no use to you here, doctor. The trouble is, the whole air is so saturated with the smell of spider monkeys that it drowns every other scent, and besides, it's too cold and dry for good smelling." "It is certainly that," said the doctor, "and getting colder all the time. I'm afraid the island is still drifting to the southward. Let's hope it stops before long, or we won't be able to get even nuts and fruit to eat. Everything in the island will perish." "Chi-Chi, what luck did you have?" "None, doctor. I climbed to every peak and pinnacle I could see. I searched every hollow and cleft. But not one place could I find where men might be hidden." "And Polynesia," asked the doctor, "did you see nothing that might put us on the right track?" "Not a thing, doctor, but I have a plan." "Oh, good!" cried John Dolittle, full of hope renewed. "What is it? Let's hear it." "You still have that beetle with you?" she asked the Biz-Biz, or whatever it is you call the wretched insect. "Yes," said the doctor, producing the glass-topped box from his pocket, "here it is." "All right. Now listen," said she. "If what you have supposed is true, that is, that Long Arrow had been trapped inside the mountain by falling rock, he probably found that beetle inside the cave, perhaps many other different beetles too. He wouldn't have been likely to take the Biz-Biz in with him, would he? He was hunting plants, you say, not beetles. Isn't that right?" "Yes," said the doctor, "that's probably so." "Very well. It is fair to suppose then that the beetle's home, or his hole, is in that place, the part of the mountain where Long Arrow and his party are imprisoned, isn't it?" "Quite, quite. All right. Then the thing to do is to let the beetle go and watch him, and sooner or later he'll return to his home in Long Arrow's cave. And there we will follow him, or at all events," she added, smoothing down her wing feathers with a very superior air, "we will follow him till the miserable bug starts nosing under the earth. But at least he will show us what part of the mountain Long Arrow is hidden in." "But he may fly, if I let him out," said the doctor. "Then we shall just lose him and be no better off than we were before." "Let him fly," snorted Polynesia scornfully. "A parrot can wing it as fast as a Biz-Biz, I fancy. If he takes to the air, I'll guarantee not to let the little devil out of my sight. And if he just crawls along the ground, you can follow him yourself." "Splendid!" cried the doctor. "Polynesia, you have a great brain. I'll set him to work at once and see what happens." Again we all clustered round the doctor as he carefully lifted off the glass lid and let the big beetle climb out upon his finger. "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home," crooned Bumpo. "Your house is on fire and your cheel be quiet," snapped Polynesia crossly. "Stop insulting him. Don't you suppose he has wits enough to go home without your telling him?" I thought perchance he might be of a philandering disposition, said Bumpo humbly. It could be that he is tired of his home and needs to be encouraged. Shall I sing him Home Sweet Home, think you? No. Then he'd never go back. Your voice needs a rest. Don't sing to him, just watch him. Oh, and doctor, why not tie another message to the creature's leg, telling Long Arrow that we're doing our best to reach him and that he mustn't give up hope? I will, said the doctor. And in a minute he had pulled a dry leaf from a bush nearby and was covering it with little pictures in pencil. At last, neatly fixed up with his new mail bag, Mr. Jabizri crawled off the doctor's finger to the ground and looked about him. He stretched his legs, polished his nose with his front feet and then moved off leisurely to the westward. We had expected him to walk up the mountain, instead, he walked around it. Do you know how long it takes a beetle to walk round a mountain? Well, I assure you it takes an unbelievably long time. As the hours dragged by, we hoped and hoped that he would get up and fly the rest, and let Polynesia carry on the work of following him. But he never opened his wings once. I had not realized before how hard it is for a human being to walk slowly enough to keep up with a beetle. It was the most tedious thing I have ever gone through. And as we dawdled along behind, watching him like hawks lest we lose him under a leaf or something, we all got so cross and ill-tempered we were ready to bite one another's heads off. And when he stopped to look at the scenery or polish his nose some more, I could hear Polynesia behind me letting out the most dreadful seafaring swear words you ever heard. After he had led us the whole way round the mountain he brought us to the exact spot where we started from and there he came to a dead stop. Well, said Bumpo to Polynesia, what do you think of the beetle's sense now? You see he doesn't know enough to go home. Oh, be still, you Hottentot, snapped Polynesia. Wouldn't you want to stretch your legs for exercise if you'd been shut up in a box all day? Probably his home is near here, and that's why he's come back. But why, I asked, did he go the whole way round the mountain first? Then the three of us got into a violent argument. But in the middle of it all the doctor suddenly called out, look, look. We turned and found that he was pointing to the Jabizri, who was now walking up the mountain at a much faster and more business-like gait. Well, said Bumpo sitting down wearily, if he is going to walk over the mountain and back, for more exercise, I'll wait for him here. Chi-Chi and Polynesia can follow him. Indeed it would have taken a monkey or a bird to climb the place which the beetle was now walking up. It was a smooth, flat part of the mountain's side, steep as a wall. But presently, when the Jabizri was no more than 10 feet above our heads, we all cried out together. For, even while we watched him, he had disappeared into the face of the rock like a raindrop soaking into sand. He's gone, cried Polynesia. There must be a hole up there. And in a twinkling she had fluttered up the rock and was clinging to the face of it with her claws. Yes, she shouted down, we've run him to earth at last. His hole is right here, behind a patch of lichen big enough to get 2 fingers in. Ah, cried the doctor, this great slab of rock then must have slid down from the summit and shut off the mouth of the cave like a door. Poor fellows! What a dreadful time they must have spent in there, oh, if we only had some picks and shovels now. Picks and shovels wouldn't do much good, said Polynesia. Look at the size of the slab, 100 feet high and as many broad. You would need an army for a week to make any impression on it. I wonder how thick it is, said the doctor, and he picked up a big stone and banged it with all his might against the face of the rock. It made a hollow booming sound, like a giant drum. We all stood still listening while the echo of it died slowly away. And then a cold shiver ran down my spine. For, from within the mountain, back came 3 answering knocks, boom, boom, boom. Wide-eyed we looked at one another as though the earth itself had spoken. And the solemn little silence that followed was broken by the doctor. Thank heaven, he said in a hushed reverent voice, some of them at least are alive.